Hello, welcome to the Consistency Project Podcast. I'm Patrick Cummings, here as always with E.C. Sinkowski. Every week we aim to simplify the principles and practices of nutrition, health, and fitness. We thank you for tuning into the show this week. Hello, E.C., how are you?
Hey, good. How are you doing?
I'm great. This week we're going to look into the topic of anabolic resistance and the factors that may contribute to losing muscle mass as we age. Before we jump into that conversation, just a quick mention, gym owners, if you want to introduce the 800-gram challenge to your community, visit optimizemenutrition.com/gyms to register for updates on the upcoming New Year Gym Challenge. You understand that nutrition is crucial for your members' success, and you recognize the challenge of getting them to adopt consistent, healthy habits. So don't start from scratch. Jump into the upcoming Gym Challenge at optimizemenutrition.com/gyms to provide your members with the most effective and straightforward approach to nutritional sanity that they've ever tried. Okay, EC, anabolic resistance is a phrase in which I have no real understanding of where to even begin. So let's begin there. What does that even mean? And perhaps why does it matter? Why are we talking about it?
Yeah, so anabolic resistance is the blunting of the muscle protein synthesis response. Now, we've talked a lot about muscle protein synthesis, or MPS, but there are so many nutrition questions that are related to this phenomenon, such as, when should I be eating my protein? How much protein should I be eating every time I eat my protein? What type of protein is best? What are my protein needs throughout life? So we do end up talking a lot about MPS because it's related to a lot of concerns people have with nutrition and specifically their protein intake. And so your muscles, reminding for our audience, your muscles are constantly being broken down and rebuilt, and the breakdown process is known as muscle protein breakdown, or MPB, and the rebuilding process is known as muscle protein synthesis, or MPS. And when you have more MPB breakdown than synthesis, you lose muscle, and when you have more MPS, or synthesis, than MPB breakdown, you gain muscle. And so with anabolic resistance being the blunting of MPS, or blunting of the synthesis, this, of course, could lead to muscle mass loss. The key word there being could, because just focusing on muscle protein synthesis doesn't tell us definitively what happens to your muscle mass, which hopefully our frequent listeners know that by now. Like, MPS is this acute response, like let's say after you eat protein or after you do resistance training. But how much muscle mass you have and retain really needs to be measured as how much muscle mass is on the body, not just what the MPS response is. Because again, muscle mass is that balance between MPS and MPB. So really, all of our listeners just need to keep reminding themselves of this topic, and especially with anything regarding protein, because you're going to hear so much about MPS and muscle protein synthesis improves. And again, it doesn't definitively predict your muscle mass gains or losses, but it is part of this overall picture in determining someone's muscle mass, which of course is why our audience cares. So anabolic resistance can be related to how much muscle mass you have, which then, of course, affects our common weight, health, and fitness goals, from aesthetics to how many more pull-ups can you do to living independently. And so, muscle mass is a hot topic around here, so we got to talk about it.
All right. So you said the anabolic resistance is the blunting of the muscle protein synthesis response. What do we know about what causes that?
Yeah, I think people hear a lot about anabolic resistance related to aging, and that as you get older, there tends to be this blunted MPS response related to eating amino acids, protein, or to exercise. And we actually do see that in studies, that older people have kind of these lower MPS rates, sometimes even no MPS rates at times when younger individuals do. Now, this, of course, could be part of the picture for sarcopenia, which we've certainly talked about a lot, the loss of muscle mass as we age. And so maybe this anabolic resistance, this blunting of the MPS response, is really feeding into this overall sarcopenia equation. But the question that we have to really solve is it age per se, or are there other reasons why this blunting is occurring? Is it just because you're 50, 60 years old, or is there some other underlying factors? And that's what the SHAD paper in the show notes was really looking at. It's this systematic review. They're looking across all the published literature at the time on this topic, not just one study. So of course we love that. And they really considered 3 different scenarios. What's the MPS response in young versus old individuals when just looking at giving them protein? So, old versus young, we feed them protein, what happens? The second kind of scenario they looked at was, what's the MPS response in young versus old individuals when they have to do exercise. So again, maybe they just go do a bout of resistance training. What happens in young versus old? And then the third scenario was, what's the MPS response in young versus old when they have both protein and exercise together? And so looking at it in this kind of systematic way is really helpful so that we can really target and optimize what's going on. Is it related to feeding? Is it related to exercise? Is it related to both? And so basically they had 48 different kind of studies to look across, and 30 of those 48 found no sufficient evidence of age-related anabolic resistance. That's 30 out of 48 found no sufficient evidence for age-related anabolic resistance, which, as an aside, I just like to point out, because we get this question all the time about how to understand research and how to find good information. This is one of the difficult things about research for the lay person, is that you can find one study that says anything, right? So 18, just to kind of close the loop here on the balance, 18 did suggest that there was age-related anabolic resistance. And so to really be able to speak to a topic, even if you're able to read one study and understand kind of what the conclusion said, it does take even more time and understanding to understand the body of literature and the balance of research and what kind of more of the research dots are putting together in a picture, right? But anyway, the short of it here is the clear majority of studies, again, 30 out of 48, did not find any evidence of age-related anabolic resistance. So point being, it's not aging per se that is the driver. So then we have this Aragon paper in the show notes. And yes, this is the Alan Aragon who we've had on the podcast. He's got a really great overview from 2023 of what is really the driver of this anabolic resistance. And as they describe, all of the authors in the paper, the two big drivers are obesity and sedentarism, meaning being sedentary. And so it's not a surprise then that we see these trends of anabolic resistance with age, because the risk of obesity increases with age, and people tend to slow down and become more sedentary with age. So it's kind of like age is related to these other factors of obesity and being sedentary, which tend to be the driver. Now, why do these tend to be the drivers? Obesity usually comes with insulin resistance, and insulin is responsible. People always think about it related to carbs, but insulin also drives amino acids into our muscle cells, which is then going to allow MPS to occur. We've got a whole podcast on insulin resistance. We'll put it in the show notes for some greater understanding. But if somebody is insulin resistant, which again typically does occur with obesity, there will be this decreased amount of amino acids going into the muscle, and therefore a decreased amount of muscle protein synthesis. And then for being sedentary, I mean, this is one of the things, this is the hill I will die on. Exercise is really the driver for MPS. You can't just eat protein and build more muscle. I mean, maybe to a small level, if you're somebody who's truly deficient in protein needs, like just not getting enough to survive, okay, sure, but that's not going to be anybody listening to this podcast. For people that are listening to this podcast, you need exercise, and the more exercise you do, the greater MPS rate you're going to have, especially if that exercise is really stressing you or challenging you. So like walking, yes, walking does improve your MPS or your muscle protein synthesis, but only to the degree that you need that muscle mass for walking. If you want more muscle than you currently have, you need to do exercise that challenges you to above the musculature required for walking, let's say. And so this is where the resistance training, and then not just consistent resistance training, but consistently trying to challenge yourself by often increasing the weight or the speed so that demand on the muscle is there to necessitate greater MPS or muscle protein synthesis. So, you know, with being sedentary, the demand is just not there. You really don't have much stress to move from the bed to the couch to the kitchen back to the bed, right? Like there's just no musculature demand there. And so this is why we see MPS rates go down. And it doesn't really have to be just complete inactivity. Even as people reduce their, you know, it doesn't have to be complete bed rest that does this. It's just as people continue to slow down with age, as people's step count goes down, intensity goes down, this is continuing to contribute to this kind of blunting of the muscle protein synthesis response.
How does protein play into this, or what role does protein intake, I should say, have in this process?
Yeah, certainly, you know, we stress the musculature, we stress it enough to build muscle, then yes, we do need to have enough protein there to kind of answer the call, if you will, of the stress, and then build that muscle to the level that we need for the demands that we just placed on it. And so we need to eat enough for those muscle mass gains or muscle mass maintenance, depending on kind of what your goals are. And there's really two big studies that kind of summarize the literature out there about how much protein you need for this. The first one is the Morton study in the show notes. We've probably referenced this a ton. I mean, this is one of the first studies that I really kind of came into or reviewed for my initial protein recommendations. And it's a meta-analysis, of course. They're combining data from 49 different studies, note of men and women, and of young and old. And they found that the upper limit of protein necessary to add muscle mass was 1.6 grams per kilogram, which of course translates to that 0.7 grams per pound number we talk about all the time. So that's one of them, one study. And then there's been a more recent meta-analysis by Nunez in the show notes that looked at, again, protein intake to support muscle mass goals. Now, what's interesting about this one is they split the results by age. And if memory serves, I think they had like 70 plus studies in this, but they split the results by age looking at, okay, how much protein do you need to gain muscle mass if you're less than 65 years old or greater than 65 years old? They might have even had a younger subset, like below 20. But anyway, basically the 0.7 grams per pound or more, because that was sort of their cut point, this 1.6 grams per kilogram or the 0.7 grams per pound or more, is where muscle mass gains were best realized for those younger than 65 years old. Now, interestingly, for those older than 65 years old, they actually found protein in the range of 0.55 up to 0.7 grams per pound, where muscle mass gains were the best for those older 65, which suggests that I should lower, not increase, lower my protein intake for those individuals over 65. But the authors of this study acknowledge that there's really not a lot of research out there for the population over 65, that it might be a little too early to kind of suggest that that's where this cut point should be. They just don't have as many studies for that demographic as they do kind of for the younger population. And so I still feel comfortable kind of recommending this 0.7 grams per pound regardless of the age. But I do like to also remind everyone that this is why like 0.7 grams per pound is quite high. Like when I go to the literature, there's 0.7 grams per pound is considered a very high protein intake, unlike social media land, which just becomes protein obsessed. I mean, or maybe it's just what happens with our algorithm. But I see these influencers; they'll be like, "Go get this meal at XYZ place, and you'll get 50 grams of protein." And I'm like, "What? Why do you need this in one meal? How much protein are you eating? It's really getting ridiculous." But the point that I'm trying to make is when you go to like PubMed and look for peer-reviewed scientific literature, you really don't find that much evidence at the 1 gram per pound level, especially as individuals get older. I mean, this study is basically saying they don't even have much research for over 0.7 grams per pound. So this idea that as you get older, especially, you would need, let's say, 1 gram per pound is just totally unfounded. But anyway, I know I got off on a little rant there. Between these two kind of big meta-analyses, we're once again at this place of 0.7 grams per pound is a really great place to be for a lot of people, even those wanting muscle mass gains. And I always have my caveat that allows people up to 1 gram per pound if they truly are somebody that's overtly muscular, advanced training capacity. Maybe they just love eating protein as like a sustainability thing. But nevertheless, it's not necessarily most of the clientele listening to this who are, yes, fit individuals looking to gain muscle, but not at this upper high-end echelon of strength capacity. One more thing I want to touch on here with this protein intake question is I continue to maintain that you don't need to worry about timing once you're hitting that total protein amount. And, there are definitely some people out there that will continue to say that timing really matters. I think that the research really doesn't bear that out. We actually talked about one of the more recent studies in a podcast that we'll link in the show notes, but they basically looked at somebody taking in, let's say, 100 grams of protein at a time and found that MPS rates were greater at that scenario than versus doing these smaller, let's say 30 to 40 grams at a time, which has kind of been the accepted dogma. That's the most perfect ideal scenario. We even talked about more recently in a study, people that were looking at MPS rates if, let's say, your protein distribution was sort of unbalanced through the day, like a light protein breakfast, kind of a medium protein lunch, and a heavy protein dinner. And they found that the MPS rates between that and something that was more, quote, optimally balanced were no different. And so until I see some really convincing evidence that this perfect distribution really plays out for people's muscle mass and performance, not just MPS rates, which right now even the literature isn't there for that, I'm not going to add that as another guideline for people to follow, because I just find that more guidelines make something more unsustainable for people in the long term. So we really want to think about like, okay, do we really have evidence to make this a true recommendation versus maybe this is just a nice hypothesis that we should keep testing. So pretty long there, but yeah, my zero point 0.7 grams per pound is right there for where we can maximize muscle mass gains for overwhelming majority of people listening to this podcast. And then also they don't need to worry about timing.
The zero point 0.7 grams that we talk about a lot is really effectively the guidelines for lazy macros, which is part of the 3 pillars program, 800 gram challenge, lazy macros, and then calories after that. Beyond just that reference, is there anything worth talking about as it relates to the broader 3 pillars method that speaks to, or maybe even solves this idea of anabolic resistance?
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of keep coming back to this concept that I would love for people to just really absorb, digest. There we go. That's the pun that we need for a nutrition podcast.
300 episodes in that we finally found that.
We've got a good pun, everybody.
Finally.
We finally did it. Really digest this one. Just because something is simple does not mean it didn't think of more scenarios. And I think one of the things that people worry about, I don't know, maybe it's my own belief that I'm putting onto other people, but I think one of the things that people will hear something about like the 3 pillars method, it's like, oh, just hit your 0.7 grams per pound. And it's like, oh, this is just for beginners. There's not enough rule structure here. There's not enough nuance here for if I eat plant protein versus animal protein. Oh, wait, no, we covered that last week. Or, oh, there's not enough nuance here for as I get older and might be fighting anabolic resistance. Oh, no, wait, we just covered that. It's like, oh, no, there's not enough nuance here if I want to like perfectly maximize my muscle mass gains. Oh, no, it does cover that. And so I really do find that these basics are not basic at all. They really do answer a lot of different scenarios. Of course, not medical conditions and all that stuff. But I don't stick to the basics to make it easy for people. I stick to the basics because that's where we have the overwhelming amount of evidence, even for these particular questions or offshoots, which admittedly are often coming from kind of viral social media posts. But nevertheless, eating to an adequate amount of protein, such as 0.7 grams per pound, makes those concerns about timing and quality and anabolic resistance and age go away. It just goes away. It's already all encompassing of that. The other thing I want to address about the 3 pillars method is it does address calories, as you mentioned, and eating the right number of calories is not just related to your weight goals. As we kind of mentioned, that one of the factors that is leading towards this anabolic resistance is obesity. And it's really kind of more insulin resistance, not just obesity per se, which means that maintaining a healthy weight is also going to help out those muscle mass goals that everybody has, right? And so this is where, a lot of people's goals are really intertwined, that somebody might want to lose weight and somebody else might want to improve their 5K time. And social media might convince you that you need radically different nutrition protocols, and you really don't, that these goals end up having similar paths in terms of their nutritional needs. Losing weight can improve your fitness. Improving your fitness can improve your health. Improving your health can help you lose weight. Like there's so many different ways that these are interrelated that you really need to cover the basics that we talk about all the time of kind of adequate quality in the diet, adequate protein, and achieving the right number of calories. And you're going to get after these different endpoints.
Beyond the nutrition element, what else can we do as it relates to anabolic resistance?
It's got to be exercise. I mean, sometimes I'm like, maybe I should just switch to talking about exercise only, because I keep believing that it's more of the lifelong longevity hack than nutrition. Of course, nutrition is important, but gosh, exercise. One of the things that the Aragon paper brought up that we've talked about, but I think it's a really great reminder for people. Muscle mass and strength isn't the same thing.
I was thinking about that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we tend to really just focus on muscle mass and muscle mass loss. And I think in part because of aesthetics, I think our community likes the look of musculature. So there can be a reason to have muscle mass just for muscle mass in and of itself. But we also want that muscle mass for strength, I believe. And dynapenia is age-related strength loss. not just specific to muscle mass loss. It's age-related strength loss. And that's actually a better predictor of health risk than muscle mass loss, because it's really about not how much muscle do I have, but how functional is that muscle, especially as we age, to be able to continue to live independently. Now, of course, these are related. Like, you're not going to find world's strongest man be a really skinny guy.
Right.
Generally, these sort of correlate, but it is important that we have functionality of that muscle mass, not necessarily, again, how big my biceps are. And so as much as I preach, all exercise is better than none, I do like to remind people that there really is something to training movements that challenge yourself and challenge your coordination, challenge your balance, and challenge your, of course, strength capacity. Some examples: training under your own body weight or with free weights is a better choice than using machines. Now, if your option is machines or not exercise, we're going to use machines. But more often than not, if we can do things where we're training our own body weight or moving the weights under our own coordination, that is going to have a better long-term adaptation. Walking and running outside on uneven terrain, going on hikes, all of that stuff is going to be better than walking on treadmills. Again, if our option is treadmill or not exercise, we're going to use the treadmill. But a better challenge would be something that requires a little bit more balance and coordination. Getting up off the ground with using something like a burpee is going to develop a better capacity, especially for longevity and quality of life, than using kind of a chest press machine that we might see at the gym. Mm-hmm. And the paper really describes it quite nicely. Like, yeah, muscle mass is great for our metabolic function, but when we look at something like strength, it also has this tie-in to the brain, this neuroprotective effect. And that's a lot of what I'm trying to do when I'm talking about people challenging themselves. It's not just, okay, we want to have muscle mass so we burn more calories. It's, okay, we want to have this productive muscle mass that really is going to be part of our independence and long-term health. And I guess the final thing I would say with that is, it's really never too late to start weight training. I know sometimes I'll have some clients in an older demographic and they haven't been weight training. I mean, you can start 65, 70, you can still over 70, you can still see results. So it's just really important for people to not think that they've lost this or they're too far along or whatever those days are done. No, the days are now. Start them now. Start challenging yourself and keep doing that. And that's where you're going to kind of fight off this anabolic resistance much more so than like, oh, I'm just going to make sure I get my protein shake today.
Got it. All right, EC. Thank you as always. Gym owners, one more reminder, head to optimizemenutrition.com/gyms to sign up for the new year 800-gram challenge. And then the second thing, folks, make sure you're subscribed to the show wherever you're listening to this or watching it so you do not miss another episode. EC and I will be back with another episode of the Consistency Project podcast next week.